Bond Raiders is a game where players work to build ordered sets of cards, representing various atoms and bonds, in order to simulate organic molecules that help them rack up points to win the game. These sets are described on an accompanying functional group recipe card, in order for players to recognize and learn possible set combinations and the resulting point system. Conflict arises as opponents raid each other's hands in order to create bonds that will help them to win the game. Optimal gameplay involves 4 players, although the game can be played with only 2 players. In the 4-player game, setup involves players beginning the game by removing the functional group cards and setting them aside for later reference. Players then shuffle the deck of cards and deal out hands of 16 cards to each player. These cards are then laid out face up in 4 quadrants displayed in 4 evenly spaced columns, 4 across and 4 down. Once all quadrants are in place, the table should consist of 64 cards displayed in an 8x8 layout. Players then draw from the top of the deck for highest card in order to determine who will make the first raid of the game, and play proceeds clockwise around the table for 4 raid rounds. The raid explained. The object of the game is for a player to plan out how they will build one or more of the sets outlined in the functional group card, using cards from their quadrant. The selection of cards can be traded out with cards from another quadrant through a series of 4 raid rounds. Each player begins their raid by rolling the 4-sided die in order to determine how many cards they can raid. They can then pull a series of cards equal to the number on their die from the other quadrants on the table and exchange them for cards from their own quadrant. For example, Player 2, in Quadrant 2, rolls a 3 and chooses 2 cards from Quadrant 1, which she then exchanges with unwanted cards from her own quadrant. These unwanted cards are placed in the spaces in Quadrant 1 left by the rated cards, and the rated cards are placed neatly into the empty spaces in Quadrant 2. The raid is not yet completed, however. Player 2 has 1 more card to raid. Remember, she rolled a 3. She chooses a card from Quadrant 4 and exchanges it with one of her own, which she values less. Her raid is then complete, and Player 3, to her left, takes up the die to begin his raid. In this way, players spend 4 consecutive raid turns stealing cards from one another's quadrants in order to set themselves up to build sets of the highest possible value in the construction round. The construction round explained. Once the 4 raid rounds have been completed, with each player having 4 chances to raid cards from their opponents, players enter the construction round, where they declare their groups by picking up the cards involved and assembling them into sets. These sets are put to the side and points tallied. Once the construction round is complete, however, there are often several cards still laid upon the table. This offers an opportunity for gleaning more points. The gleaning explained. The final round of the game involves players rolling for the opportunity to assemble possible group sets from remaining cards on the entire table. This is called gleaning. Players examine the table in order to ascertain if there are remaining sets available. If they see that there are, they must declare that they wish to glean from the table and roll the die for highest roll in order to be declared the gleaner. The gleaner must now assemble a viable group of cards, set them aside, and have their points tallied. A second round is offered, and if players see an opportunity, they roll again for the opportunity to glean from the table. A player who wins the opportunity to glean, but cannot assemble a viable group from the table, has committed an infraction. He or she will be docked 5 points for this misstep. Scoring. When all possible potential sets have been built, the scores are tallied as follows. Determine the total set score for each of the groups a player has accumulated. Add up the numbers on all cards remaining on the player's quadrant and subtract this number from the set score. The resulting number is that player's final score. Player with the highest score wins the game. There's also a 2-player version of the game. In a game played with only 2 players, the table is halved instead of divided into quarters, and each player's hand made up of 32 cards. All other instructions are the same.